Hey everyone, Depressed here with Middara on Tabletop Simulator. This part is just going to be hopefully a quick video going over some mistakes or possible mistakes I've may or may not have made throughout the series so far and possibly in the future. So I held this off for a little bit because I was waiting for some confirmation with the recent changelog that came out that updated some of the rules. But I'll go more into that later when essentially some of the rules have changed that I'll point out, but some of them, if they involve like changing a card, I'll probably not do, I won't do those updates until they actually get updated in Tabletop Simulator. One of the major things they changed was how utility cores work. But for right now, since these cards are still the same as they were before, I'm just going to go over the rules mistake I made involving the current rules as they are. So I'll go over that in a second. So there were two rules that I noticed that I've been making mistakes with, at least since, if not in this playthrough, but in other playthroughs. I know one that I have been doing in this playthrough that you probably have noticed if you're familiar with the game is involving utility cores. So utility cores are kind of weird in the fact they have a flip effect that actually gets unflipped at the start of encounters. Originally, I didn't really understand what the point of that was because I didn't really understand what the difference would be between something like that and something that's just a per encounter ability. But it's actually key that this is a passive effect rather than just a per encounter effect, because items that are in your pack, any abilities or effects they have do not activate while they're in your pack. So, for example, if I start an encounter and I use my utility core and get myself a juice box or whatever, and then use the re-equip action to swap in this utility core and flip that one and get another item, if the encounter doesn't have a refresh, if it's a refresh, you get unflips no matter what. But if it's not a refresh, this one would unflip, but the one in your pack actually wouldn't unflip. So I actually, in chapter 1, this wasn't really a big deal because there were only 2 utility cores, and I believe I had them distributed between 2 characters. So if you had something like this, where each of them are getting one item using their utility cores, since those are equipped, they would still unflip at the start of the next encounter. But since I think I ended up getting an extra one, I think I eventually start doing a setup kind of like this, where I have 3 of them. And I would do something kind of like this, where I would flip, swap, flip, swap, and then finally do this and have the ghost canister out, which is a little bit stronger version of a utility core. What I just did by itself is fine. The issue is at the start of the next encounter, these 2 should not have unflipped. Only this one would unflip. Now, the way, obviously, like I mentioned before, the way to get around this is you were supposed to divvy them up to other characters. So overall, it's not a huge deal that I made this mistake, especially balance-wise, because, I mean, as good as common consumables are and throwing knives and all that, it's not enough to be game-breaking, in my opinion. So I'm not too worried about having to restart or anything weird like that. But once you guys get caught up with the backlog, which there's quite a bit of backlog, I will adjust my equipment to actually do what it's supposed to do. Of course, if they update the cards based off the changelog, it's not going to matter, because the way the changelog works is they changed it into a passive effect where you only get an item of your choice at the end of an encounter, but only if you had it equipped from the entire encounter. Overall, I don't really like the change, but it does make the mask easier. So if they do start making that, they add that change to the module itself, I will probably stop using utility cores and just use some other core. But that's neither here nor there right now. Now, the other mistake I made, or may have made, I don't think I've made it in the playthrough so far, but I did make it in other games I've been playing in. And that involves the fact that in general, actions can never happen at the same time. If an action starts, it always has to end the previous action. So, for example, now this rule I generally know, but I didn't realize it involves certain other aspects. So, for example, if I have Zeke here start moving down here, like as part of his movement, obviously that's going to provoke a break attack because he's leaving a adjacent square. The cave sickle would attack, and whether or not as long as it doesn't defeat Zeke, he can keep moving after the attack resolves. Break attacks are the only exception to the rule, where it specifically says after the break attack is over, you can continue your movement. But if I start moving, and I provoke the break attack, and I choose to counter, like the attack missed or I dodged it or something, doing the counter immediately has to end your current action, which for Zeke would be his move action. So if I move and it misses and I ignore it, all good, I can keep doing the rest of my movement. If I move, it misses, and I counter, my movement stops here. So I've made that mistake a few times playing with some other people, which we didn't even catch and notice. Overall, it wasn't a big deal, and it was in the early game anyway. I don't think I've done this mistake in the playthrough, but I may have, and if I did, I apologize. And that's pretty much it. That's kind of the gist as far as the mistakes go. So far, I don't think there's any new updates for the TTS module so far. Yeah, you guys have a bunch of backlog to go through. I'm pretty much just waiting. A lot of my waiting was also to see if the changelog would change certain encounters. Unfortunately, it didn't, or at least I haven't noticed any changes, much to my displeasure. They did change one encounter, but it was a counter I've already done. But it was an improvement, in my opinion. But other than that, if any of those changes do eventually get applied to the rulebook and all that stuff, I'm not going to worry about rewinding or changing anything. It's just going to be too complicated if I do that, so I'll just keep playing as is. For the most part, I'm more interested in getting through the story with you guys, so there's that. There is one encounter where I may take a mulligan. I'm just saying that ahead of time because it's an encounter I do not believe is very well balanced. But I'll go more into that once I actually start recording that particular video. But other than that, overall, I've been having a lot of fun. The group I've been playing, I've actually started playing with some other people, which definitely takes off some of the load of having to control everything. That being said, I'm still controlling 2 players, and I made one of them the summoner to show off summoning for them, so I'm still controlling like 3 characters. But overall, it's been a lot of fun. I've actually been playing. The group is super aggressive in their style, and they're not using. I chose to not even take mend, so we don't even have any like special healing or anything like that. We do have the res ability, but that's about it. We just run in and just trash stuff. It's pretty crazy. So that's definitely one of the things I like about this game. It's just, I've said it multiple times, it's just all the builds you can make, which is why a certain encounter really kind of rubs me the wrong way. But I'll go, well, actually 2 encounters, I guess, kind of rub me the wrong way, but I'll go more into that in the future. I think the biggest issue I fear for this game as far as balance is concerned is I feel like they're trying to balance the game based off assuming that every group has summoning. Because the amount of HP that bosses start getting gets ridiculous. As well as abilities and convictions and all that stuff. But so far, a certain encounter I've voiced my complaints on in Discord, and so far the only reply about a group that actually did it and got the best ending had summoning, and I was doing it without summoning, and I couldn't actually accomplish it in time because I didn't have enough damage output because I didn't have the extra bodies. So that's one of the things I'm kind of worried about, because I would rather them balance the game kind of off a bit on the easier side and then add variant rules that give people the option to make it harder, which they did add in the changelog, some variant rules about increasing the monster HP. They also they did do a slight nerf to summoning in the changelog, where it's espers do not automatically heal between encounters. For those who don't know, there's a rule where if you're below half health, essentially, and you finish an encounter, you're supposed to heal back to half. It's also the same thing for which also means that espers will not automatically revive if they fall in combat and you go on to the next encounter. That being said, you can easily get around it if you have the res ability, because all you have to do is just throw your esper off a cliff, then res it, and then end the encounter, and you'll still get the same effect, assuming you have it active. Other than that, overall the changelog had a lot of good things. It made an attempt to make Abraxas dice a bit more doable or viable. I don't think they succeeded, but it's slightly better. There's no doubt it's at least slightly better now. They made some changes to certain weapons and stuff, some of which I use pretty often in my own playthroughs. One thing they did add, and I'm going to take a look at the old version of this weapon. So the Kusari Gama is kind of seen as like a really crazy exotic weapon. Okay, I see how it works. So this effect here with the Kusari Gama, where it moves the target up to 2 spaces within SOI, they actually give this a keyword. As you probably know, there are pushes and pulls. The effect that this Kusari Gama has is actually called command. And what command does is you can move it orthogonally a number of spaces equal to the number, which is kind of unique. I think Kusari Gama is like the only weapon that has this type of stuff. Unfortunately, in most cases, the Kusari Gama is kind of not the best, at least from what I've heard from other people. The rest of it was kind of like a lot of rules clarifications. They did do one slight nerf to one boss, which was actually, I think, justified. It might actually be enough to make that boss viable for even non-summon groups. But I'll probably talk more about that when I actually start recording again. Other than that, I don't think there's really anything else. I've been somewhat vocal on their Discord, trying to give as much feedback as I can. It usually comes in bursts for me, because usually I haven't been playing the game as much recently, and there's only a few conversations where I felt like I needed to chime in for stuff. Unfortunately, I don't think they're listening to me, but that's okay. Overall, the game is still fun. Personally, I might have to start doing my own house rules if they don't make certain changes. One of the things I think would be probably lowering the HP of certain bosses towards, especially in Chapter 3. Because holy cow, it's that issue where, what game would I describe it as? So in Mario 3, when you fight certain bosses, usually you just had to jump on them 3 times. So you kind of had to recognize the pattern and just get 3 jumps on them. In Sonic the Hedgehog, you have to jump on the boss usually 8 times. And it's kind of that situation where it's like, all right, you recognize the AI in Middara, but you still have, 200 plus HP you still need to chisel a way through. It gets to be a bit of a slog in my opinion. But like I said, I'll be attempting certain encounters for the second time ever, and I'll see if my opinion changes once I do it with summoning. Which, if it's easier with summoning, that's going to just reveal the issues I figured the game has, which is they're balancing it off of summoning, which I like. I like the fact there are abilities that are maybe a little overpowered in this game, but I don't like it if they base the difficulty curve based off having those disciplines at all times. Because one of the, like I said, the main draws of this is making all sorts of unique builds and things like that. I mean, I can understand certain encounters being more difficult if you have a certain build. Like, for example, if you fight against a lot of Earth Loas and you don't have any armor piercing and no magic, obviously those encounters may be difficult, if not nearly impossible to do. But it's one thing to say, okay, you need to have some magic damage or have some armor piercing in the group, as opposed to you have to have this summon, else it will not work. This discipline, else it will not work. They did add some variant rules, a variant rule for summoning, which is if your Esper dies, it does a blue die worth of damage to you. That's what's it called? Irreducible. Overall, it's kind of an interesting take. Personally, I don't mind if people play with this version. You guys already know how I build my summoners. As much HP as possible. So taking a blue die of damage isn't really that big of a deal. Maybe taking 2 blue dies if you have the twins might be a bit more drastic. But the other thing about Espers, I did mention they don't heal through between encounters anymore. There was another thing. It was actually a buff. It used to be summons. You could only have one active in a group. So in other words, if one character had summoning and then another character had something that allowed them to summon as well, you couldn't do both at once. Now it's set so as long as it's a different person, you can have multiple summons. So if you did have that item on the summoner, they can't do both at once. But if the item is on somebody else that's a non-summoner, you can have both active at the same time. And yes, there is an item that lets you essentially be a summoner. Not as good as a full-fledged one, but it does give you summoning. Anyway, I think I've rambled on enough. I talked a little bit about the changelog, or at least what I can draw from memory. But like I said, the main thing about this was trying to correct some rules issues. Like I said, for the next several videos, you guys are going to see you're going to see Zeke with 3 cores on him. And for like single encounter like stories, where it's just one encounter and then you get a refresh, it's completely legit. You don't need to worry about it. But any situation where I didn't get a refresh and I was unflipping all the cores, that was actually not how it's supposed to work. If I wanted to do that, I would have to divvy them out like I have on the board here, where every character has a core, and they would have to swap it in at the end of an encounter, and then at the start of the next encounter, unflip, use it, and then swap their actual cores in. It's a bit annoying to get. It's a bit annoying rule to get around, but like I said, with the changelog coming, it's not going to matter in the future anyway. So. Like I said, once I actually start recording again, I will correct this issue. And like I said, there's the issue with the break attacks. I don't know if I've actually done it in these videos, but if I did, like I said, if I counter a break attack, I have to stop moving. That's just how the rule is supposed to go. Anyway, I think that's about it. Sorry for rambling for 17 minutes. I am the Depressed Eeyore, and this was Middara. See you guys next time.